Thank you. All right, sounds like we're ready to go. I will call this hearing of the Youth and Education Matters Committee to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderwoman Howard. Alderwoman Ingracia. Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Present.
Alderman Stevens.
Here.
Alderman Page.
Present.
Alderwoman Walker. Chair Rice.
Present.
Alderwoman Howard. Alderwoman Ingracia. Alderwoman Walker. We have 4 present. We have a quorum.
Wonderful. For right now, we will go ahead and actually, no, we have Alderman Stevens. So I will entertain a motion on the approval of minutes. I realize our committee has shuffled membership a little bit in leadership, but would entertain a motion on the approval of minutes from Wednesday, May 25th of 2022.
So moved. I'll second Jane Page.
All right, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderwoman Howard. Alderwoman Ingracia. Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Aye.
Alderman Stevens.
Aye.
Alderman Page.
Aye.
Alderwoman Walker. Chair Rice.
Aye.
Alderwoman Howard. Alderwoman Ingracia. Alderwoman Walker. We have 4 aye votes.
Great, by your vote, you've sustained the motion. And so we will move on to the only item that we have today is a committee discussion with the St. Louis Research Practice Collaborative. And I believe if I'm going in order on the speakers here, Dorothy, you're kicking us off this morning.
That's
all right,
right.
Great. So this, I'm excited to have you all here. Please, when you do start talking, just go ahead and introduce yourselves and let us know who you are. And yeah, let's get it going.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Alderwoman Rice and members of the committee. We are here to talk to you about research with the St. Louis Research Practice Collaborative. So we first want to recognize, we know you're on your legislative spring break, and we very much appreciate the time that you've taken to meet with us and hear from us this morning. And we appreciate your time so much. Yes.
I'm sorry, I don't
Yes.
mean to interrupt, but Chair Rice, do they need to be sworn in?
Oh, that is a good, let's just go ahead and do it let's go ahead and do that. So could you stop sharing for just a second? We'll just do this real quick. Anybody who's a speaker this morning, if you would raise your right hand and come off mute, and do you swear that the testimony you're about to provide will be the truth and the whole truth?
Yes.
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 Perfect. All right, let's get it started again. Thanks so much.
Great. Okay, great. Rachel, if you want to go to the next slide, that'd be perfect. Okay, so my name is Dorothy Rohde Collins. I am here on behalf of the St. Louis Research Practice Collaborative. I am currently in my final semester of PhD coursework at St. Louis University, studying education policy and equity. And I'm here with my colleagues, who I'll introduce in just a minute, to share with you some research about student mobility in St. Louis. So after me, you'll be hearing from Dr. Candace Carter-Oliver, who is the CEO of Confluence Academies, Dr. Andrew Butler, who is an associate professor of education at Washington University, and then Dr. Nicole Freeman Williams from the interim superintendent of St. Louis Public Schools will then close out our presentation. So we're very excited to talk to you about who we are as the SRPC, our first research project on student mobility in St. Louis, and then share with you about where this research is going and how we see it potentially aligning with the work of the Board of Aldermen. We also want to make sure to save time at the end of the presentation to have dialogue and discussion with you about our work and potential areas of overlap. So next slide, please. The mission of the SRPC is to conduct rigorous research in deep partnership with educators to inform policies and practices that foster systemic improvements in educational, social, and emotional growth for students in St. Louis. That mission is at the very core of why we are here today, presenting to policymakers on behalf of city government. It's also at the core of why I am involved in the SRPC and why I see this work, why it is so valuable to the city of St. Louis and to our education system. So as I believe most of you know, I served from 2017 to 2021 on the Board of Education of the city of St. Louis, which is the school board for St. Louis Public Schools. And during my tenure on the board as the policymaker, I felt very frustrated with my inability to get access to data and research that would inform these huge decisions we were making. So at the time, the response to the COVID-19 pandemic, how to reopen schools safely, we also conducted a process of permanent school closure that we know affected not just schools, but also neighborhoods. And it felt very frustrating to not be able to find the answers to the questions that I had. And that's why I'm working with the SRPC. So I know that the data is out there somewhere. It's not that people are hiding it, but in many cases, it's because we just haven't asked the questions yet. We haven't done the research yet. And so the SRPC is bringing together the largest education networks in the city. So we have representatives from St. Louis Public Schools, from Confluence Academies, and from KIPP St. Louis. And we're bringing them together with researchers from Washington University, from SLU, from UMSL, to try to unpack our system of schools in the city and try to understand what's going on. And what we're learning is that a lot of this, there are shared challenges across all of these schools. And so we know that these aren't just district problems. They're not just charter problems. They're affecting all of us. And because they're affecting all of our schools, they're affecting all of our wards and all of our neighborhoods. And we want to make sure that you're brought into this discussion about what our research is saying, because it informs then your practice as policymakers on behalf of the city. So the SRPC is conducting research focused on St. Louis with the intent of making St. Louis a better place and making our schools a better place. And so while we are presenting to you today on education research from our perspective as education practitioners and education researchers, we want you to consider, what is my role as a member of the Board of Aldermen? What is my role as a policymaker in helping contribute to our understanding of this problem? So does that mean that the Board of Aldermen is there an opportunity to look at demographics or population changes or how things are kind of unfolding across the city and be able to contribute that research back and combine it with the research of the SRPC? So these problems that we're seeing across our education system they're complicated. They're difficult to untangle. And so the more research that we can put into that, the better off that we'll all be. So as we present, yes, we're presenting about schools, but think about how does this affect my role as a policymaker and the people that I represent. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Carter Oliver, who will share with you about what a research practice partnership is.
Yes, thanks, Dorothy, and thanks everyone for allowing us to have the space. With the challenges that we know we have, there's such great opportunity. And what we want to really lift in this space throughout this time is the fact that we are doing this work across sector, charter schools and St. Louis Public Schools. And that's important because what we have found, which is what we're working with student mobility, is that our children are moving and they are going in and out of our schools, charter and traditional public, routinely. I happen to serve as an elementary principal in St. Louis Public Schools, Woodward Elementary, some 10 years ago, and I had a student there by the name of Asia. And knew Asia's mom very well. Asia, bright student, great child. And when I entered into Confluence about 6 years ago, I became Asia's superintendent here within Confluence. And I was surprised to see her because I'm thinking, oh, Asia, I knew you from whence ago and you were here and now you're here. So it's just, it was a very good example for me of the change that our students will experience and that they move across systems and parents are really wanting the best for their child and choosing schools that they feel are the best fit for their child. And it's incumbent upon us to understand why these moves are made, and then how we can best go about really, in many ways, reducing change that can impact the child's performance negatively, which we'll get, a little bit further down the way on that. So why a research practice partnership? If we could advance to the next slide. Well, it makes sense, really, frankly. It makes sense for educators and researchers to work together, for our work to, interact together so that we can truly make fundamental change and necessary intentional decisions that will improve schools. What we found is that we've had a lot of conversation with teachers, counselors, social workers throughout our school systems, and we really need research and practitioners to work together to ensure that the data that is collected is data that can be used and used in a good way. What we also know, if we could advance to the next slide, is that there's a lot of questions and a lot that we can answer if we really take the time to work together to do that. So we want to be asking the right questions to get to the right solutions. And this practice partnership is helping us do that. This research practice partnership is really headed in the right direction. One example that we actually have that's nationally known, if we could advance to the next slide, is and to the next one, if we don't mind, is the Chicago's Freshman On Track study. We know that when impactful research is done and done well, that we can actualize good results. And Chicago did a very good study some time ago when they looked at freshmen and could pull out specific data to understand whether that child was going to graduate on time or not. So when we're asking the right questions and we're using data in a very good and intentional way, we can truly make change in the way that we want to. So useful data is necessary. If we could advance to the next slide. Student mobility. We chose student mobility as the first place to really hone in on our research. Again, going back to the fact that we have a hypermobile city when it comes to students and their enrollment in schools. And we see this happen in the classroom. We see this happen in schools and the impact it has on students when their best friend leaves or new children arrive to the classroom, and the changes that the teacher has to make to welcome the child, to place the child in groups, to do some assessments to understand where the child is performing well or may need some intervention. So the SRPC, our work in this area, we found Confluence, KIPP, and St. Louis Public Schools was a good area to really begin to start to hone in, to get real granular data in a way to help us understand what's happening in our city, and then what decisions might we make to help change the outcome of that. And I'll hand it over.
All right. Hello. My name is Andrew Butler, and I am the chair of the Department of Education at Washington University and co-chair of the advisory committee for the collaborative. And I just want to start by echoing my colleagues' expressions of thanks for allowing us to come into this space and share our work with you. I'm going to provide quickly here kind of a high-level overview of some of the research that we've conducted to date. And as you know, St. Louis is a really unique city with a unique educational context. And our goal here is really to understand student mobility within our particular context. However, we wanted to start our research project by conducting an extensive review of the research literature on student mobility, both nationally and locally. There have been a few published studies that specifically focus on St. Louis, including a recent study from 2018. And so in conducting our literature review, we learned a few things. And here are just some high-level highlights. One consistent conclusion across all of the published research on student mobility is that mobility in every form, right, is harmful for student outcomes, and it gets worse with every move. So what I mean by every form is that sometimes student moves are by choice, right? And others are forced. And regardless of how a student is moving, it is oftentimes harmful for that student. And every time that they move, it gets even more harmful. And we're looking here at a host of different outcomes, both academic in terms of well-being and other important things. Mobility not only harms students, but it also harms their peers and teachers. That's a consistent conclusion also across this kind of national literature review. And finally, it is very clear that mobility is not just a school issue, right? These moves that happen either by choice or by policy. So for example, because a family might be evicted and need to move, are really a bigger problem that move beyond schools. And that's one of the reasons that we're here wanting to talk to you and to share our research with you. Next slide, please. So after conducting this national literature review, we wanted to focus in on the St. Louis context. So we began working with the publicly available data that we had to conduct kind of an initial descriptive analysis. And our approach with this project is a mixed methods approach. And what I mean by that is that we are focusing both on the quantitative aspects, so the numbers here, as well as qualitative methods. So we are conducting surveys and interviews and focus groups because we really want to center the voices of students and teachers and parents and put a story on these numbers. The numbers alone are not going to tell us what we want to know. So here, just a couple of high-level conclusions here. There is, right, an issue here with kind of hypermobility, as people talk about in St. Louis, where, for example, in 2019, half of the St. Louis city schools had 37% or more of their students transfer in or out after the start of the school year. And some of the schools, right, are experiencing mobility rates that are really astronomical, right, and others are lower, but on average about 37%. And we have a quote up here from an elementary school teacher, and again, I want to center the voices of students and teachers in this work. And here, this elementary school teacher says, "As an educator, my goal is to develop kids over the long term. But that growth has to happen as fast as possible because I don't know how long I'm going to have." So we have a research brief that if we haven't already shared with you, we can share with you as publicly available that dives a little bit deeper. But let me just go to the next slide here and show you a little bit of the data about mobility compared to some of the other surrounding counties. And what I'm showing you here is the data over a 10-year period from 2010 to 2019. As a quick aside, we are focusing on kind of the pre-COVID era first, because as you know, COVID changed everything for everyone in school communities as well as more broadly. And we're actively trying to understand how COVID affected student mobility, but just giving you a sense of the trends before that. So what we're plotting here is as a function of time down on the y-axis there, we're plotting the DESE, the Department of Education and Elementary and Secondary Education mobility rate. And you can think about this mobility rate as reflecting kind of the percentage of students who either move in or out during an academic year. So imagine a school that serves 100 students at some point during an academic year. A rate of 40% would indicate that 40 of those 100 students will have either moved into that school or moved out during that year. So what you can clearly see from this figure is that St. Louis City schools have a much higher mobility rate relative to other surrounding counties in the St. Louis region. And even though student mobility rates are dropping over time here, they still remain exceptionally high. Next slide, please. We can also compare St. Louis City to similar size metro areas. And here are some other ones from Missouri. We have Kansas City, Springfield, the KC metro area specifically, and then Columbia. And what you can see here too is that relative to similar sized metro areas, St. Louis City still, right, has among the highest, or the highest, excuse me, student mobility rates of all of them. And we've done similar analyses looking at other areas in other states as well that are similar to St. Louis in terms of their makeup. Next slide, please. Here, I'm just putting all of these first two figures on the same figure. It's a bit busy here, but the take-home message overall is that St. Louis City has the highest mobility rates of all of these surrounding metro areas and counties. So this is a real significant issue that we need to understand and think about how to intervene to ameliorate. Next slide. So a few conclusions here just from our initial work on the student mobility. One takeaway very clearly is that student mobility is harmful to students, and both students who leave and students who stay, as well as teachers and families. On average, we know that St. Louis City schools have very high student mobility, higher than surrounding cities and counties in Missouri. And we know also that the extent of incidents due to mobility may not be fully reflected in public available data. One of the things that we've been trying to understand is how schools document students moving in and out. And it may be that the rates that we show you here are actually underreporting student mobility. All right, I'll hand it over.
So thank you very much, Andy and colleagues. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Chair Rice, Vice Chair Schweitzer, and all committee members. It's an honor and privilege to be here this morning on behalf of the St. Louis School Research Practice Collaborative. Thank you for the opportunity to share this morning with the Education and Youth Matters Committee. My name is Nicole Williams. I currently serve as the interim superintendent of the St. Louis Public Schools. We are the largest local educational agency in the city of St. Louis, serving approximately 19,000 students and families in 62 active learning environments and nearly 3,700 staff members. Currently, I also serve as the co-chair of the St. Louis Research Practice Collaborative, and it's an honor once again to share the research that we're currently engaged in and to really frame for you this morning some of the opportunities and challenges as we think about our path forward, engaging you in this collective advocacy. I deeply apologize. We're experiencing some issues in our school system with our internet. So I think if I turn off my video for a couple of minutes, this issue might be resolved. So
You're fine. We can hear you clearly as well. So it's just the video that looked a little fuzzy, but whatever you're comfortable with.
So I apologize. Thank you. So let's center, take a moment to center what we want to know as we think about research, the Research Practice Collaborative, the quantitative data that my colleagues framed, and our path forward. So right now, I'd like to take a moment just to frame how we're harnessing the power of voice, particularly the voices of those who live this experience each and every day. So our students, our staff members, and our families. There are specific questions that help us to frame the why in this qualitative approach. And so we're thinking of what are the patterns of mobility? What are we seeing across the system, across St. Louis City? What are the patterns? And then how are we, families, for example, how are families being engaged in the conversations about why they choose to move or why they stay? We know that the pandemic has had an indelible impact on our families. And so one of the questions that we're centering in this work is how has the pandemic impacted mobility? I think disproportionality is an area that we're all concerned about. And so some of the specifics around disproportionality, what are the factors that contribute to families moving, families staying? Some of those factors might be communication barriers, workforce issues, housing, cultural bias. All of those areas are areas that can potentially be factors that families share with us as to the reasons why they made a decision to move and out of the city of St. Louis or move from school to school. And finally, as was framed throughout this presentation today, we're looking at how schools and our community partners can intervene and support this work as we move forward, as we gain a collective understanding about who we are, the research that we're engaged in, and how we as a community, public and private sector, all of us working together can really have an impact on a thriving city and a thriving school community. Next slide, please. So as we think about centering the next steps in student mobility, our goal really is to understand the patterns, the causes and consequences of student mobility in the city of St. Louis. We are moving into a qualitative study, and that's the why behind the work that we do, looking at focus groups with families and practitioners and students, understanding in a very intentional way why these families are making decisions, the impact that it has on our school communities, what are our practitioners saying about this problem of practice, and then what are some of the best practices that we can implement not only in our school system, but certainly across our city to alleviate the effects of mobility. We haven't spoken specifically about the GIS mapping, and I do want to just center, I think, two specifics about the mapping, which is really a visual image of the patterns of mobility. We say hypermobility here in the city of St. Louis, looking at the census tract patterns and student level data to really understand perhaps some of the social determinants of educational attainment, because we know when there's stability in a school community and a student enters in pre-K and exits in grade 12, then we have a better opportunity certainly to understand the educational attainment of that particular student in our school system. When that is interrupted, then there are certainly consequences, which is what we're sharing with you at this time. Next slide, please. So what I'd like to do as part of our work this morning is to really center this collective efficacy, if you will. What does this mean for our city of St. Louis? What's our call to action as we think about areas that might impact our students and their families? There have been recent newspaper articles that talk about declining enrollment across the region. There's also recent articles and research that speaks to specifics around education funding, housing, affordable housing, understanding gun violence and day-to-day trauma, and some of those specifics that we are really looking at here as a school system, and certainly as the three largest local educational agencies in the city of St. Louis Public Schools, KIPP, and Confluence. These are common challenges that we are faced with as school systems: attendance, violence, trauma, areas that spill over into our school systems and really impact how we as educators educate every child every day in every classroom. So I want to just highlight this idea of collaboration across public sectors, how we build trust, respect, and rapport in the work, and how we center these shared issues and challenges as we think about what does it mean in our school system, for example, to center joy every day in every classroom. We know that when we do that, there's a high correlation between a student's happiness and their level of joy and our staff members and the grade point average or the achievement that that student attains in school. So those are some of the ways that we're just thinking about how we bring our families into the conversation currently, how we're engaging our educators into the conversation. This St. Louis Research Practice Collaborative centers the voices of practitioners. It centers the schools. So as we expand our research capability and we look at things, factors like attendance, for example, we know that's a shared challenge across our three LEAs. We know that it impacts education and educational attainment when students are not in school. So we know that 10% chronic absenteeism is a challenge. We deal with the issue right now of McKinney-Vento, which is a federal legislation which talks about homeless population. And for us here in the city of St. Louis, in St. Louis Public Schools, about 5,000 of our students are identified right now as homeless. And we know that that number could be much larger because it's the self-identification. And from a cultural perspective, families might not define themselves as being homeless if they're sleeping on the couch of grandma's house or at an aunt's house and those things. But based on McKinney-Vento federal definition, that is a definition that incorporates this idea of being homeless. We also are looking at how research comes together to really support this work from a common framework, common understanding, building a collective understanding around the work, and then understanding that as a community, our policymakers are so critical to this. Let me give you an example of this in action. This past January, about 100 or more of our parents went to Jefferson City as part of the Parent Day of Action to really advocate for priority and local funding. Last year, we were very successful with retaining $18 million here in the city of St. Louis Public Schools with HB 1552. Right, our House bill. We're looking at trauma support. So we are advocating for more support around trauma, more support around housing insecurity, and providing support for how stability in housing can support stability in our school systems, all three of our LEAs. So these are just some of the ways that advocacy and policymakers can be a part of this conversation in a very intentional and thoughtful way as we work together from a collective efficacy lens to really deliver on the promise of a high quality education for every child every day in the city of St. Louis. Next slide, please. So our research timeline is very intentional. We are now centering qualitative research, the why behind the hypermobility that we see from the numerical statistical data. And so I do want to just highlight just from January to May of 2023, we are in the process now of conducting interviews and surveys, once again, centering the lived experiences of the students, families, and staff who every day experience mobility. We are looking at creating May through August 2023, sort of creating the shared qualitative findings, very much like the brief that we shared with you, just being able to share some qualitative findings with schools and our school communities so that we can center the voices of practitioners as we look at this problem of practice of mobility and how it impacts and continues to impact educational attainment. And finally, September to December 2023, we will be in phase 3 of our analysis and really honing in on the overarching question, what are the effects of mobility? How does it impact our school communities? And then certainly research is so important to inform practice. And so what are the next steps for us as a school community here in the St. Louis Public Schools, for KIPP, for Confluence? How can we come together and really look at this qualitative and quantitative mixed method study and really bring in some very intentional action plans to address the issue of mobility here in the city of St. Louis. Next slide, please. I do want to highlight and recognize that this work can't be done in isolation. It has to be done as collective efficacy from a collective efficacy framework. And I do want to just ask you to take a moment and look at all of the partners, all of our colleagues who are part of this work. They've informed this work in a very intentional way. They are part of the opportunity, as we framed earlier, to really move this forward so that St. Louis becomes the thriving city that we know it needs to be in order to support every child here in the city of St. Louis. I do want to take a moment and just recognize our board president, Mr. Matt Davis, who is doing tremendous work right now, leading our legislative priorities for 2023. He is the chair of our Legislative Priority Advocacy Committee. And so some of the work, as I noted earlier, which really intersects with the work of this committee, is the work around trauma support. Certainly highlighting the need for the continuation and support of public funding. I'm really centering safety in the work across the city of St. Louis. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the recent newspaper article of a homicide of a 17-year-old in the city of St. Louis. He attended a school here in our school district, and the ripple effect of that particular homicide that happened on a Sunday evening had an indelible impact on the siblings of that young man, as well as other family members in the city of St. Louis who attend our schools. And so how do we support and center the need for additional social emotional learning and supports? And then finally, I talked a little bit about this idea of the McKinney-Vento and homeless. We know that it's a challenge. I live here in the city of St. Louis, downtown, and unfortunately, oftentimes I'm faced with families and children who are homeless, and they talk to me about their needs. And I do understand we have a tremendously powerful team that is working to support our families, support our students in a number of ways. However, we know that this is a problem that is, while it impacts the school community and we work to support our children and families, we know that this is an area that we, from a collective community framework, can work together to really address. And I do want to thank our team members from across the city who are working with us in a very intentional way to address that area. The last piece I do want to lift up as I frame our thank you is this idea of our citywide plan for education. And if you haven't had an opportunity to be part of the citywide plan for education, I think there are two areas that are critical to this conversation. The first is this idea of understanding how we as a city can act together to address the challenge of mobility, the challenge of the achievement and opportunity gap. And so the citywide plan for education that's chaired by our vice president or our board, Mrs. Antoinette Tony Cousins, and who chairs that particular body of work, is really in the process right now of developing a roadmap for a comprehensive, collaborative, citywide approach to education reform here in the city of St. Louis. And so I want to thank Dr. Carter Oliver, Ms. Rhodey Collins, Dr. Butler, and all of our team members who are on this call who participate in a very thoughtful way in the citywide plan for education, and all of our team members from across public and private sectors who are part of this very intentional work as we look at educational quality across the city of St. Louis, specifically as we serve all children well, which is the core mission and vision and purpose of education in our city. I'm going to pause here, and once again, I apologize for the issues that I'm having with my video. We thought it was fixed. My technology team did all they could this morning to make sure it was fixed, and it was working for a while, but now it's blinking again. So I do apologize if that interrupted in any way the flow of this conversation, but I did want to just center the importance of policymaking in this work, and certainly the importance of the work that you do as part of this Education and Youth Matters Committee. Thank you for hearing this important study that we're engaged in here in the city of St. Louis that impacts every child, every day in every classroom across the city of St. Louis. And thank you for just allowing us to present this morning on such an important education topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Members of the committee, you should have a copy of this presentation as well in the drive, and there is an appendix after the slides that were presented as well with, it looks like, some more detailed information if you want to check that out there. So thank you all so much for the work that you're doing for centering our kids and our future as a city. And thanks for coming to present to us today. This committee is kind of a newer committee, and I'm hopeful that the work will continue into this new Board of Aldermen that will be beginning in April as well. And it's a good partnership to have between our schools and City Hall, and that has not always been the case. And so we thank you for helping us bridge that as well. I will go ahead and go through the committee and we'll see if folks have questions. So it looks like Alderwoman Schweitzer, do you have any questions?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you all taking the time to come and present this information to us. This is clearly just an enormous amount of work, and I agree that the partnerships between all of the people who are involved in educating kids and the kids themselves, the teachers, need to be involved in the conversation. So thank you for doing that so diligently. There's one slide that we didn't spend a lot of time on, but it kind of stood out to me, and that was that between knowing something's a problem and it being actually implemented, it said 17 years. And so that was a really interesting slide to me. And I did appreciate, the decline of mobility in St. Louis seems to be something that's on track for continuing. But I would love to hear more about what's happening now that we thought about 17 years ago that's hopefully helping. And then also, any sort of timeline for what we should expect to see in the next 17 years if we stay on a path this way.
Well, if I may, and then I'll hand it over to you, Rachel, for you to maybe expand a bit on my comments. This slide is very telling, where the time between, it gives an example here, between a health scientist learn something significant from rigorous research, and when health practitioners change their patient care, such a distance in between there, which really, what we want to uplift here in this space is the true need for researchers and practitioners to work more closely together so that we are coming up with the right questions, and getting the best answers along the way, and through that process, I think will help with that. It also, shares or tells us, to me, it says that, the changes that we need to make will likely not happen overnight, nor will the results per se, come overnight. But it is necessary to do this work, to study this work, to bring about the change that we need. I think we started with, there was a question in the chat about enrollment decline, its impact on student mobility. We are in this space because we do have a lot of school choice and options for families. And sometimes that can be a bit laborious for families. That can be a bit overwhelming for families to have to select, choose, determine. And so the more coordinated we are around our decision-making from the policy standpoint, from school openings to school closures to school consolidation. I mean, all of these things that we need to be looking at and studying that we know impact student mobility. The better we are in this space collectively across sectors, I think the better we are in the end with the result that we have. Rachel, what would you like to highlight?
I'll just add something really quick, but I see Andy wants to say something. Our purpose of having a different way of doing research through this research practice partnership is to close that gap. So rather than it being research is done in this silo, maybe published in some papers, someone has to find that it's useful, and then it has to trickle its way down to the health practitioners in the health field, which is already a field that's very focused on data. We want to make sure that the research that is done is directly influencing and impacted by what's happening in schools. So creating more of a loop rather than this long cycle of research to practice. Andy, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I would just, echo your comments and add that slide really represents the traditional model of academic research and its uptake for, problems of practice and policy in society. And what we're doing with this research practice partnership model is really trying to do the opposite, right? Let the problems of practice drive the research and really make sure that the research is having an impact in the shortest amount of time possible. And that's one of the reasons that this RPP model has become so popular in the field of education, and has been a real boon to our group in trying to tackle this first research project.
I also apologize. I realized I did not introduce myself. My name is Rachel Matsumoto. I am a project manager at Skip Design, which is an organization that supports educational efforts in St. Louis. And I am providing project management support for this SRPC.
I just wanted to just respectfully address Alderman Page's question in the chat. It really speaks to this idea of population changes, decline, and school closure, impact on student mobility. There's a really recent article in local news that talks specifically about this school enrollment continues to fall across the St. Louis region, and the headline is, "Where did all the kids go?" And I think it's just it points to, the challenges that we're talking about here when we think about mobility. Back to Vice Chair Schweitzer's question, it really speaks to this idea of what's happening with this trend line as we continue to see a trend line that is decreasing over time. And what can we as a city, there's an old African proverb, it takes a village. What can we as the village, this community, do to intervene in a very intentional way to bring a thriving community back to St. Louis? So St. Louis is at the height of just the kind of environment that every person who comes to St. Louis wants to live and be a part of. I think part of that goes back to, as this article highlights, and as we do further research around the why, it speaks to this idea of the pandemic having an impact, certainly, over the last couple of years. It speaks to how affordable housing is so important in bringing people who want to live and work in this region to St. Louis City. It also talks specifically about this idea of how, for example, budgetary constraints and supports can encourage residents, people to come to St. Louis and want to be part of this thriving community. I'm going to give you an example from one of my schools here in the city of St. Louis, in North City. I was recently at the school, and the principal took me to a room in the school that's beautifully set up. It looks like you could be in any of the local supermarkets. I won't call one in particular because I don't know where everyone here shops, so I don't want to be disrespectful to where you might shop. But that particular room in the school resembled a local supermarket. It had canned goods and fresh breads and all kinds of things. And what the principal shared with me was the power of having her families come into that school community, do everything they would do in a local grocery store. But the only difference is at the end of that experience, they don't exchange dollars, right? Because that's a food pantry where they're providing necessity in that particular community. She frames it as living and working in a food desert. There's not a local grocery near in that community. And so the school community has become the hub of the community for quality food and fresh food. So how do we bring people into the community in a way where they feel valued and honored and respected, and they have access to basic necessities? In education, we say Maslow's hierarchy, right? Food, clothing, and shelter they're the basics in Maslow's hierarchy before we can get to all of the other necessities that we provide as a city. So food, clothing, and shelter. And so I'm going to use Maslow's hierarchy to kind of frame this idea that until we get to having adequate food, clothing, and shelter for families in the city of St. Louis, we might continue to see the kind of population shifts that we're seeing in the city of St. Louis. And Again, I don't have the research numbers right now to back that theory, but what I will say is as we look at the research, the numerical statistical data that we have from the quantitative brief that we shared with you, and as we center the why in our qualitative research, those answers will provide us with more opportunity to come back to you and continue this dialogue, because this discourse is so important to the health of our city. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to jump in. Alderman Schweitzer, if you have more questions, feel free to ask them. I am going to need, I got a little double booked this morning, so I'm going to have to bounce, but Alderman Schweitzer as our vice chairperson will take over and finish going through the rest of the committee for questions. And I see Alderwoman Howard is joined us as well. So I think she'll be up next. But again, thank you so much for being here for this research, for this work. I will go back and catch up on the rest of this conversation here when I return as well. Thank you so much. Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you. I will come back to myself. Alderwoman Howard, do you have any questions?
I think more than anything, I have a comment. I came in late, I apologize, but I guess one of the things that has not been addressed is, the feeling of, in Maslow's hierarchy, one of the things is food and safety, feeling a sense of safeness. And, I don't know how, and this is kind of the elephant in the room, I don't know how we're going to build schools when we can't build safety in our city. And I don't know, schools need to be safe places. Parents need to feel that their children are held in esteem and protected in that environment. And I don't know, as a former educator in the city of St. Louis with St. Louis Public Schools, I don't feel as though that was as big of an issue as it is now. And I think that, if this is to go forward, there needs to be some partnership between those people that provide safety in the city and the school district. As we well know, the highly publicized shooting that took place months ago at the old Southwest building was sort of a wake-up call, but I don't think you can isolate the safety of students versus the safety of those on the outside. So I was just wondering if there's anything being done to address that and to assure parents and I guess the community at large of the availability of a safe space for everyone. And
I was only going to add that, and prior we did allude to the work of the citywide plan in that space. There, we do have the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department present, and one of the work groups specifically is looking at community and school safety. So we underscore exactly what you're saying. We understand that, and we've said for quite a long time that schools are very much interconnected to their communities. We're microcosms of the community. If it's happening in the community, it's going to resurrect itself in the school setting. We simply try to, mitigate, and of course we have counselors, and you being a former educator or an educator, understand all of the supports that we must have in place to support a child to focus on learning and for teachers to focus on teaching. So it just resurrects that need. And it also, I think, which is what we will ask, is that we regularly come back to this space to have this dialogue. So we're presenting on, student mobility and its impact. And we know that we also know how interconnected it is to these other things, which is why we're here. And we would like to have this space and are very much committed to speaking with anyone else that we need to collectively get this sense of urgency and charge out so that we can work together so that policies and our practices can align in that space. Dr. Williams, did you want to say anything in addition to that?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Carter Oliver. Again, I apologize that my system, they've been coming in and out to try to fix it. So I apologize when I go off camera. I'm still here and present. Thank you very, very much, Alderwoman Howard, for centering the importance of safety and security in our school communities. And that is critical to your point to Maslow's hierarchy. We know the October 24th tragedy here in the city of St. Louis impacting Central Visual Performing Arts and collegiate. That tragedy continues to create the trauma that we all experience, not only in those schools, but across our 62 active learning environments, and certainly across our city. It has been a collective community effort. We work very, very closely with our local police department. We've worked very closely and continue to work closely with the FBI and other agencies. We're working closely with our city agencies and our partners for social emotional support. We have trauma teams that are deployed on a regular basis, and they're supporting our both school communities, continuing to support both school communities, because so many things can unfortunately trigger trauma as we continue to think through how we intervene and provide environments that are safe, that promote intellectual safety, social emotional safety, physical safety. We center that. We're working very, very closely with Missouri State School Boards Association. We just had a debrief with over 150 team members across our district, where we centered what does it mean to now be in recovery, the 4 phases of crisis management, the last stage being recovery, and going back to then what does it mean to be prepared and to mitigate. We've implemented a system, a 911 RTA system that is intentional around this geofencing, where our properties now we receive on time, real time 911 alerts that really support our security system team members in having real time information. However, I think I'm just going to really focus in and quote some work that we're doing, some research from the national landscape. We're working very closely with some of the team members from Columbine. And what we know, even 23 years later, is that schools are still the safest places in America. And the way that we do that is working from a community ethos perspective, bringing every team member into what does it mean to be safe. So something as simple as propping open a door, and I see Dr. Carter Oliver shaking her head in affirmation, just really making sure that all of our team members understand their role and responsibility in keeping our school learning environment safe and secure for parents. Our communication structures are critically important, making sure that parents know exactly what's happening. Unfortunately, we get real-time information about something as difficult as realizing that there's a gun in the street near a particular park, right? That impacts because schools are in that area. So now having that real-time information and being able to inform, in this case, the police informing us or us informing the police department, those are ways that having intentional, thoughtful, collective efficacy around communication is so important, working in partnership with our local agencies, particularly our police department and our city, and just being very transparent with our parents and community about what's happening and how something social media over the weekend can spill into the school community on Monday or long weekend, Tuesday, after children are out of school for a period of time. So all of these things impact how we function as a school community, and particularly how we provide a comprehensive collaborative approach to supporting safety, centering safety and security, and ensuring that every team member, our staff, and our students feel safe, and being on call if it means 24 hours a day, 7 days a week right now, as we offer trauma support, as we offer our team members who need additional services that we can provide, and partnering with our city agencies and our local officials to be able to do that in a very intentional way. So that's really our path forward. And thank you very much, Alderwoman Howard, for centering the importance of safety.
You're muted, Alderman.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's not your job alone, and it's a community issue that needs to be addressed. And thank you very much for your detailed response. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. We'll move on. Alderman Bill Stevens.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Excuse me. I do have a few things. First and foremost, thank you all for being here and for presenting today. Prior to office, I was a early childhood outreach coordinator with St. Louis Public Library, ages 0 to 5, doing literacy initiatives. So while I am not myself an educator such as yourselves or my esteemed colleague Alderman Howard, I was pretty education adjacent. So this is a subject that's very deeply important to me. And in fact, I'm a student now at St. Louis University, so even more. I would thank Alderwoman Howard for highlighting the intersectionality of human needs, just to be rather broad, be it Maslow's hierarchy of needs, be it other paradigms, because food insecurity couples with or informs public safety, and public safety informs housing rates, and housing rates inform your ability to have a roof over your head, or determines which schools you go to, or determines which services are afforded to you. So absolutely, it is public safety. It is food insecurity or food deserts, of which we have many in North City. And we can't approach it from just a one facet approach. As you all know, of course, I'm preaching to the choir, but I do want to say for the record that this is so much bigger than just one particular issue. And it doesn't affect just our public schools or our children, it affects every citizen in the city. I also want to thank Miss Williams, I believe it was, Miss Williams, for sharing the federal definition.
Doctor.
Is it Dr. Williams?
Doctor.
I terribly apologize.
That's okay. Nicole is fine.
No,
Thank you, Alderman Stevens. That's fine.
I'm just Bill. Terribly sorry, Dr. Williams. You earned the title. I should use it. So, for sharing the federal definition of homelessness, because I think oftentimes we think homelessness is just the citizens that are perhaps panhandling or living under bridges or living in tents or XYZ, and it's not. I myself have experienced homelessness when I was a younger person, or I guess now when I was a young person, but I experienced homelessness twice of varying capacities, and both were under that federal definition, but perhaps not the general public's definition. So I appreciate you sharing that. For anyone that is interested, Cornell Law has an excellent breakdown of the US Code 42 subsection 11302, so 11302, because it's an expansive page. So I thank you for the intersectionality. I thank you for the federal definition that guides our approaches to addressing these issues. And finally, in summation, I do want to ask, since the Board of Education and really the realm of education is a political subdivision of the state and not necessarily the city, is there any intent to make the same presentation to the Missouri legislature or to provide it to them? I do know, having been to Jeff City on behalf of the Board of Aldermen in the past in defense of our schools, specifically in defense of the moratorium resolution that we passed, that is a conversation that the Missouri legislature is interested in having, and that they are more receptive to hearing than not. I know that's hard to believe with our current slate of bills coming from the legislature, but I do wonder if it wouldn't be beneficial to make this same presentation, this data-backed presentation, this well thought out and sensible presentation to the state legislature, whom of course provides the authority for the Board of Education, or provides ultimate oversight of the school districts.
Rachel, you want to respond to that, and then I'll add.
Yeah, so we are in regular conversation with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So that they provided us very detailed student level data for some of the quantitative analysis. And we want to make sure that not only does that get back to our schools, but also can go back to the state and form their understanding, of course, we're not like pushing any agenda. We just want to provide what's going on and that information back to both DESE, but also we're also thinking about who at the state level really could use this information to make decisions about policy. As of now, we haven't had any conversations with actual state representatives. We did want to make sure that when we go to them, we have a little bit more, since it's a bit of a trip for us, that we have some meat for them.
Excellent.
So I just wanted to add just one piece to that. I think we've been doing some advocacy work. We have a legislative advocacy committee that's chaired by our board chair, Matt Davis. And one of the areas that we've been very intentional, laser focused on supporting, which is aligned with our mobility study, is this idea of a new category for weighted factors for what's being framed as transient students, those students with a high mobility ratio of 25%. And so we're looking at supporting this idea as an alternative. Do not count a student's test score for 2 years of state accreditation if the students moves more than 2 times in a year to different schools, either within or outside of the district. And so advocacy around this work is critically important, to your point, Alderman Stevens. And one of the ways that we're really lifting this up to the state level right now is through our legislative platform. We spent a day of advocacy in Jefferson City this past January, where we had over 100 parents. Their voices were centered as part of this mission critical work. How do we ensure that our legislators understand the importance of McKinney-Vento? Because the way it's defined right now, many of our students may not even define themselves as homeless. And so we're not getting an accurate count probably here in the city of St. Louis and across the country, I dare say, because it is federal legislation. How do we look at gun violence and support for trauma? So October 24th was just the most devastating experience for all of us here on this call and across the city of St. Louis, because it impacts all of us, children, families, and our community in ways that matter. So how do we look at the support for social emotional learning, trauma, and the need we know for perhaps and this may not be politically correct, but having safe, thoughtful gun legislation that really takes into account the need of children and families and our community, and particularly centering schools and the voices of practitioners in that work. We also really are looking at how we support legislation that state funding for DESE to support every district's efforts to help students who are homeless or lacking necessities, including healthcare, food, clothing, and housing, because we know poverty has a deleterious impact on children and their ability to learn and come to school ready for learning in ways that we know are so important. And many of our children probably already have the opportunity to do so. So that's just some of the ways that we as a school district, St. Louis Public Schools, we're working through our legislative committee, advocacy committee chaired by Matt Davis, and we're working through our citywide plan for education that brings in the voices of all sectors across the city of St. Louis under our vice chair, Antoinette Tony Cousins, to really center what it means to have collective efficacy and to put together a blueprint for what quality education means in the city of St. Louis, and how every team member, every stakeholder contributes to a thriving city with quality education centered in this work. So hopefully that's helpful. And I know that Rachel and Sarah Chung and those team members will work diligently to ensure that we perhaps can have an audience at the state level. Thank you.
Well, no, thank you, Dr. Williams and Ms. Matsumoto. I'm very pleased to hear that you all are working on not only with DESE and the state legislature, but on that sort of formula, that exception, because I mean, we know based on empirical evidence that merely having to be up super early in the morning to catch a bus has a very heavy adverse impact on one's academic studies, or having to skip lunch. I mean, I was a student that couldn't afford school lunch, right? that does absolutely have a deleterious impact on a human's ability to function. So I think that's very sensible. I should hope that the Missouri legislature considers such an exception. And in closing, I do want to say thank you all for your work. I know that our school board, and now I know that this group as well, has gone so far above and beyond for our students, be they ages 0 to 5, or well, be they ages 0 to 18, is the scope of your work, if not further than that. And it brings back many fond memories of the changes that just a small group of us can have on a whole bunch of people. So thank you for your work. It is important, it is vital, and at least to me, I think it is very helpful. So with that, I respectfully yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Stevens. Alderman Page?
Yes, thank you, Madam Vice Chair and members of the committee. And thank you very much to our presenters today. What led me to put that question in the chat early in your presentation was a couple of things. And as Dr. Williams so astutely pointed out, one of the things was the St. Louis Post-Dispatch article, "Where Have Our Children Gone?" or a very similar title. The other thing was an experience that I had a few years ago. And I'm sure those who have been with St. Louis Public Schools for a while will remember when Cote Brilliant Elementary School was closed. And I worked with a volunteer organization that was invited into the school by the then principal before the school was closed to actually put on a program. We actually arrived early, met the parents and guardians and students as they arrived, shook their hands, wished them well. And we actually put on a little program to encourage the students to be diligent in their studies, even though their neighborhood school was closing. So it's hard for me to get that experience out of my head. The actual, and I'm going to just come a little short of saying trauma, let's just say trepidation, that both the students and the parents faced as their neighborhood school was closing. Parents who walked their kids to school in the morning from neighboring streets, and they were going to have to find other busing or other transportation methodologies to get kids to new schools and new environments. And with that experience, that's what kind of led me to my question. I heard a lot of anecdotes about individual students and individual families and their mobility, either forced upon them or voluntarily undertaken. But I was really concerned about wholesale mobility as schools are closing, as our population shifts, and sadly, in recent years has reduced. So I'm concerned about how that mass mobility, mass migration due to school closing, is that a part of your research? And are you going to be studying that closely and looking for solutions to minimize the impacts on students and their readiness to learn due to closing of schools?
Maybe I could start in responding from our group. This is a great question that you raise here, Alderman Page, and something that we are certainly interested in looking at, both at kind of the macro quantitative level, as well as the micro and qualitative work that we are doing. One of the things that we've been trying to do in mapping the big picture with the quantitative data is to understand particular instances, for example, of when a school has closed and how that affects, right, the data that we have, and making sure that we have, that kind of information, that contextual information, right, so that we are understanding the numbers in the right way. I would also add that a real goal of our research is obviously to understand student mobility and to think about interventions that we could put in place to try to curb mobility to the extent that we can. But we also know that some mobility is inevitable. And so one of the other things that we really want to work on is trying to think about interventions and programs and other types of supports that we can put in place to ameliorate the effects of mobility when it has to happen, right, for one reason or another. And so that's about trying to think about helping schools, helping families deal with the movement among schools and making sure that to the extent that we can, the effects on students themselves, their peers, teachers, right, is lessened.
Thanks, Andy. I think that's, Dr. Butler, I think that's an excellent framing of our path forward as we think about the research. I want to just say thank you to excuse me, to Alderman Page. I want to respectfully remind us and just thank this body for the moratorium from the Board of Aldermen that really framed our path forward as a school system as we think about the opening and closing of schools here in the city of St. Louis. And so that support of our system was a policy action that really helped us from a citywide planning perspective, really think through what does it mean to center quality education in the city of St. Louis as we open and or close schools here in the city of St. Louis. So that grounds and centers and frames the work that we're doing currently as part of the citywide plan for education. And that blueprint respectfully and thoughtfully should provide us with a comprehensive, collaborative approach to what does it mean to have quality education across our schools here in the city of St. Louis. Does that mean we open new schools? Do we close schools? What does that mean for us as a city? And so I think the intentional way that was framed from the Board of Aldermen, that vote really supports the path forward as we think about across this region, we're losing students, we're losing families across this region. How do we recruit, attract, retain high quality staff members to do this work? That's a common challenge that we're grappling with as well. So when families, I'm a grandmother, so my 5-year-old attends right at City of St. Louis Public Schools. We're excited that there's a portfolio of schools that provides for his needs and the needs of 19,000 students across our city. I think the opportunity for families to say, this is the right match for my child is also so important. So we're really centering this idea of quality education. We're talking about education infrastructure. Many of our schools were built at the turn of the century. And so understanding that our school buildings may not always be as aesthetically pleasing in terms of 21st century learning environments. They're clean and they're beautiful with, the hardwood floors and those kinds of things. But that's a challenge and an opportunity when we talk about offering 21st century learning environments where collaboration, communication, creativity, and this idea of problem solving, critical thinking, where we center the 4 C's, how we arrange those environments is so important. Let me give you a very quick snippet. A kindergarten teacher at our last citywide planning meeting, she's a kindergarten teacher at Merrimack, stood up and talked specifically about how the infrastructure of that building as a kindergarten teacher impedes her ability at times to really have the kind of collaboration that she needs because of the structure of the building and where, for example, bathrooms are located. So as part of the citywide plan, education infrastructure is being studied to figure out what does it mean to create a quality learning environment where the structure of that environment really supports the mission and core vision of the school systems that we're centering in this conversation. So to your point, thank you so much. I think the conversation must continue as we have this kind of discourse in a public forum where we're sharing where we are, the challenges, the problem of practice that we're studying, which is mobility, but attendance could very well be what we're studying as part of this work. Trauma could be something that we're studying as part of this work. The impact of homelessness, all of the areas that safety, those are areas that we know impact our school communities, and the school community has to become the hub of a thriving city. And so what are the ways that we intersect, if you will, the interdependence of a school system and the city where it is lives and thrives is so critically important. A thriving city, a thriving school system. And that's really the mission and core vision that we have as an organization. I hope that answers your question, Alderman Page. Thank you so much for centering that for us.
It does so much. And I would also add that your comments about the in-school grocery store are near and dear to my heart. One of the elementary schools in my ward, we came to realize that approximately 30% of the students were housing insecure in one way or another. And we worked closely with Spire, and as I described this, you probably know the school I'm talking about, to establish an in-school market to provide necessary clothing, soap, toothpaste, the essentials to help these students and their parents and guardians to have these items available free of charge to make the students' educational and home lives more stable. So I understand the grocery store. We did something very similar, and down the street and around the corner from me, you know exactly where I'm talking about. I won't name the people involved or the school, but you know what I'm talking about. And I think those kinds of efforts will help our students and our educational system overall. With that, Madam Vice Chair, I yield back. Thank you, everybody, for presenting today.
Thank you so much, Alderman. I see Alderman Todd here. I don't know if he has any questions. Okay.
Yes, I would just like to, my questions have been answered. I would like to thank Dr. Williams. And first of all, thank you, Madam Chair, for recognizing me. And thank you, committee people, for attending today. But thank you, Dr. Williams, for recognizing that poverty is a key factor. And as a Board of Alderperson and a citywide resident, former St. Louis Public School teacher, and the person who presented the resolution, is that, and as a alderman again, I think we need to, we can do things. Number one, we can make sure that we have affordable housing. For example, when we are building these high rises and when we are giving tax abatements to, in many cases, houses that the public school student types cannot afford, we are contributing to the closing of schools, because in order to keep schools open, we have to have a certain number of students living around those schools. And we've torn down many houses where students did live. And so what we need to do, what we can do as a board is, I know I presented the Todd plan, which asks that these houses that can be saved be boarded up on all floors and fixed up so that students can live in them. These vacant lots that we have, we spend $15 million a year or more on vacant lots. We need to have affordable houses built on those lots. And so we need to have a moratorium on tearing down houses and apartments. When I say houses, I'm talking about apartments, because many of these students that go to St. Louis Public Schools do not own their houses, but if we tear down rental houses, apartments, then we're going to have even fewer students living in the area. So poverty, but I think too, we need to ask, as all the people we can work, we do affect the public school system, even though it's state run. Again, when we tear down houses, we have also, thank you all the people for being an advocate, for example, on the resolution. And we should continue to play a critical role in making sure that our public schools, and when I say public schools, I'm not even talking about charter school, but the public schools that we vote on, but charter schools, our public school, but all the schools, and especially public schools, have the resources, and that we continue to be partners with the St. Louis Public Schools, because we do play a critical role. And so again, I don't have any questions, because the question I had was about poverty, but Dr. Williams, thank you for recognizing and also advocating that poverty has an impact on test scores and everything else. And so, and if we want to improve test scores and for our children, we must have neighborhood schools that they can attend. And thank you very much. And I yield back, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you so much. Any members of the committee that have already spoken who want to be recognized again, please raise your hand. All right, wonderful. Thank you all so much for coming and presenting today. I think that was a very, very interesting presentation, and I know there's so much more to talk about anytime that you all can involve the Education and Youth Matters Committee, and anytime you have information to present. I know Chairwoman Rice is always happy to hear from you all. So does anyone have any closing remarks they'd like to make before we move on?
We just want to thank you once again on behalf of the St. Louis Research Practice Collaborative, centering the voices of practitioners in our school communities. The goal is really to transform education in the city of St. Louis through the power of quality research. So thank you for hearing our voices today, for engaging in very thoughtful, intentional discourse with us. And we look forward to being invited back to continue this conversation in ways that really bring us into this call to action as we galvanize the community around education, quality education across our city. So thank you very much again.
Thank you. Thank you all. All right, we will move on to announcements. Does anyone have any announcements? Okay. We'll excuse Alderwoman Walker and Alderwoman Gracia for necessary absence.
Noted.
Thank you. And with that, we will move on to adjourning. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Clerk Heggs, as well.
Thank you. You're welcome.